Showtime did a documentary on Mauro Ranallo, and it's going to be about his struggles with bipolar. Mauro suffers from bipolar, and I think all the internet wrestling community was exposed to this last year when there was an incident with him and JBL, and apparently JBL was bullying Mauro. Maybe he was just ribbing him, and and Mauro was under a lot of duress. He was working SmackDown. The travel was hell. He was also doing Showtime boxing, and he was doing MMA gigs, Bellator. He's the head announcer for Bellator right now, and he was doing so much. And there's reports that he had a terrible episode, and it caused him into depression, and people hated JBL. And I still believe JBL was ribbing him a bit too hard, and JBL is a bully backstage. I think that could have happened. I think that's why JBL is not with the company anymore. So I doubt that's going to be a part of this documentary. I wanted to bring that up. I've heard a lot of good things about this documentary. Seen the trailer, it's tough to watch, and Ronaldo's a really nice guy, a really likable guy. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this documentary. So the documentary starts off by showing Mauro and his the house he grew up in. He grew up on a farm in Canada, and he discovers wrestling at a young age, all-star wrestling, and he by chance becomes the announcer. And he's described that he's announced everything, all sports: football, hockey, basketball, baseball, all for his high school. And he had friends at the wrestling event, and the announcer needed to go away for a bit, and he gave the mic to Mauro, and he worked the whole show, and he did amazing. And he became their announcer, and then his life changes when his best friend dies suddenly out of nowhere. Just really weird. They didn't really explain too much of the details of how he died, but it really messed him up. His brother, actually Mauro's older brother, who's in this documentary, basically said it fucked him up, and he went on to have this horrible anxiety breakdown. Just he had a nervous breakdown, and the doctors over medicated him when he was in the hospital because it was so bad. He was over medicated, and he was suffering from delirium, and then eventually he was diagnosed with manic depression, bipolar disorder, or what it's called now, at just 19 years old. So that's how he first started to have this disease. Really horrible, things that happen. He loses his best friend. He just has this horrible mental breakdown. Just almost, he's on so much medication, and it all happens there. So that's really where he begins his battle. Really, all stems from his friend. He doesn't really mention that there was something he suffered this earlier in his life, but that was when he was officially diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Mauro was dating Jenny Neidhart of the Hart family. I don't know if she's Natalia's older sister or something, or cousin, but he was dating her for a while. He was having those outbursts. He'd have them out of nowhere. There's times where he had it during, when he was on radio, he'd just have it in between breaks. So it was getting really bad, and he was getting depressed. So Mauro gets a huge break when Boss Ruin calls him, and they're doing some kind of voiceover for a movie, and then he gives him his number, in case something else happens. And there's an opening for Pride. Pride, if you don't know, was a Japanese mixed martial arts promotion. It was the second biggest MMA promotion in the world, behind the UFC. Pride was really big. It wasn't a situation where UFC was that much bigger than Pride at one point, because they had a lot of big stars. Most notably Fedor Emelianenko, Russian heavyweight, Nogueira brothers. He had Alistair Overeem there. You had their legend Vanderlei Silva. So a whole bunch of great MMA fighters were in Pride. And when Ranallo got that job, that's just a huge break for him. Getting a job at Pride was really big. While calling Pride, he gets an opportunity to work at the Fight Network in Toronto, Canada. That's basically a combat sport channel. They carry wrestling, MMA, and boxing. They show him interviewing a whole bunch of MMA fighters: George St. Pierre, Cain Velasquez, Vanderlei Silva. They show him interviewing Dana White, so a whole bunch of guys. And that's really, again, he there, I think he starts to do the pro wrestling show, the first Aftermath show, and they talk about the Raiders and stuff. I think that was very controversial. In February of 2007, he's hired by Showtime, and there he works in Strikeforce. Strikeforce was under MMA promotion, so Pride at that time went under. UFC bought it. Pride, they went bankrupt. I mean, Pride was so good, but they went bankrupt. They went to the US. Things weren't working out. They lost some stars, and UFC bought him out. And then he went to Strikeforce, and Strikeforce again got big. I don't think it was as popular as Pride was, but it was in ways it was more popular in the US for sure. But Pride, there's something about Pride I love. The theme music, Pride. It's a spectacle. It's more than just MMA. I mean, UFC was a sport. Pride was more just a spectacle. To say it was like pro wrestling is an understatement. It was like a circus. It was so much different. But Strikeforce was a very good promotion, really good. Lot of fighters there. Ronda Rousey was there, and there he becomes very successful once again. And I think it just opens up more. I mean, the bigger his name got, the more the bigger way to fail would hurt him worse. And they're showing a lot of Strikeforce right now. The reason I think they're showing so much more Strikeforce than Pride is because this is Showtime's property. Showtime owns Strikeforce. They owned it. It went under, obviously. It's defunct now. Went under in, I think, 2012. But one of the fights they're showing right now is they were showing as one of the most famous Strikeforce fights was Ronda Rousey versus Miesha Tate. That was when Rousey won the title from Tate. They had a big rivalry, two very attractive MMA fighters, both really hot, both hate each other, and that really was big. And when Ronda won, made her a big star in the UFC. That was when Dana White took notice, and I think he eventually brought woman out of the UFC after seeing that fight and thinking Rousey would be a major star, and she was. So when Strikeforce goes under, it's like Pride. He has another trip to the hospital. It's like it's over. Another defunct MMA promotion. He loses his job again, and it sends him back into the hospital. He has another major meltdown after Strikeforce goes under, like Pride did. So this documentary, I mean, he talks about how he medicates the medication. He's thinking about suicide. He admits he makes him want to jump off a roof. The medication he's prescribed. So when he's in California, when he moves there, finally he lives in Los Angeles. He decides to start medically smoking marijuana for his bipolar, and he smokes weed, and that's how he copes with it, and he brings him peace. So it's kind of weird, this documentary. They keep showing him playing music on a piano. They show it so many times, and I think he's having an episode. I'm not so sure of that, but he probably is. And he even says in September 2012, he's on a hospital bed telling his friend thank you, and looks like he's gonna take his life. That's what it seemed like. And then a year later, he's calling a major boxing fight. He eventually gets another major gig. This is his biggest one by far. He becomes the lead play-by-play boxing announcer for Showtime Boxing. When all their fights, he's their lead guy, calling some of the Mayweather fights, and he calls Mayweather and Canelo 1 year later in 2013. So 2 days before Mauro calls the Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao fight, which is, I think, the biggest fight of all time. I don't know if the Mayweather-McGregor buy rate beat it, but it was close. He's calling it. He has this panic attack. He loses his credit card 2 days before the fight. This is that time. That fight was just so gigantic. It was the biggest fight ever. It was just such a massive fight. So he's calling the biggest fight. He's calling Mayweather Pacquiao, and I think that's I don't know. I mean, it almost seems like that something as bigger the event comes, the bigger the thing the fight is. It puts more pressure on him. So after that fight, he just has a mental breakdown in this hotel room. And this guy's just so depressed. And he goes to visit his friend's grave. He hasn't visited in a while. His friend who passed away when he was 19. And now he go to the WWE when he gets the SmackDown gig. And he announces with Jerry Lawler. And then, of course, it all went downhill very soon after that. So when he goes to WWE, I mean, he works for them. They don't even think about the JBL stuff. They just completely ignore it completely. It's not even relevant. He has a mental breakdown again. I'm sure the travel had something to do with it, but they don't even mention the JBL stuff. He leaves SmackDown. He has a breakdown at the Chicago airport, and then eventually he went to NXT, and he's doing a great job right there. And I think his contract expires in 2019. So I don't know if he'll stay. So it kind of has like a happy ending. He's in NXT now. He loves doing NXT. He loves the passion. The fans love him. They've been interviewing all like the fat, out of shape fans. It makes all wrestling fans look like in a horrible light, showing the fans they choose to interview. But Mauro's doing. It's a cool story. It's a nice story. Triple H is on this documentary a lot, and it makes something really likable. Not too many people are okay. You have to give him a lot of credit. Like no one. The way you see him in this documentary, it's hard to envision him the same way the way you see him, and I don't think almost no one would allow people to see him that way. And he keeps getting gigs. With NXT, he's also doing Showtime boxing, and he called the Floyd Mayweather Conor McGregor fight, that super fight as well. They show him calling that, and he's also calling Bellator MMA, which is the second biggest MMA promotion. Hopefully, Bellator doesn't go under, but Bellator is doing good right now. He just called a show last night, Bellator 200, in London, and that's a big gig to have too. So like that's 3 major gigs he has right now, announcing jobs. So I thought this documentary was excellent. This was a great documentary. It made Mauro Ranallo a really, really likable guy, and you really feel bad for him, but you also admire him for being able to have the courage to talk about his mental illness the way it is, and to show him having the mental breakdowns, and to see that on camera was really really, it was disturbing, but it was also really eye-opening. And I thought this was actually just a fantastic documentary, and really a great that story on this guy's life and what he has had to go through. And I would recommend this to anyone. This was an excellent documentary by Showtime, and the Bipolar Rock and Roller was a great documentary. And to end this, I think there's only one way: pride never dies.